Rodríguez is the author of Dusk and Dust from Hub City Press. His poetry has appeared in the Gettysburg Review, New England Review, Washington Square Review, and Puerto del Sol, with new poems forthcoming in Tri-Quarterly, Phoebe, and Southwestern American literature. He currently lives with his family and teaches in Austin, Texas. Please welcome Esteban.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I want to thank everybody that's here, the people at Malvern, and lastly, thank you, Mr. Gabino, Iglesias. I'm going to be reading from my manuscript titled Displacement, and essentially just centers on displaced people and the various manners in which that comes about. This first poem is titled Colchis. All night the ocean burns, and when dawn rises without an alibi, blurs the epilogue of flames. A set of felled argonauts, chained together at the hip, begin cleansing the shore, trudging through pools of oil, through whale and seal carcasses, through plain wreckage spread evenly along the sand. Piece by piece, the men haul their shares, glass, metal, the mangled edges of a wing, and when they strip the circuitry from the cockpits, devein the insides of an engine, they re-enter the ruins, fill their wagons and wheelbarrows with asterisks of bone, with limbs that have been twisted into crude punctuations, or with flesh that becomes a language these men no longer speak, but which they remember, and which they mutter as softly as you mutter your name beneath the rubble, hoping your voice, rising like embers, won't be cauterized by the eulogy of wind. This next poem is titled Theophany, which is a term for the appearance of a god. Doused in the froth of dawn, your God appears before you, and you take his hand, lead the boy he assumed the shape of through labyrinthine mirages, through miles of sagebrush, emptied suitcases, skulls wrapped in plastic bags. And when, days later, the heat settles, renders a desert into focus, you drag your God beneath the swollen shadow of a cactus, tie his hands behind his back, fill his mouth with dirt and branches, and stagger as you confess your oldest sins toward evening's best attempt at closure, knowing that if impulses had played out, you would have cradled the shriveled figure your God had become, laid him by a bush, and, while chanting fragments of a prayer, smashed his head with a rock and watched as darkness curdled out, formed a puddle whose reflection didn't show your face staring back. These next two poems are from the second section, which the second section is titled Exodus from this manuscript, and they're just pretty much the introductory poems. The poem kind of starts off the same way as the last poem, Theophany, and this one is titled Genesis. Doused in the froth of dusk, you rise like an old god, half clothed, alone, made of flesh the desert has gouged, gashed, torn, severed in more words than you have the language for, but which you want, eager to ascribe myth to your battered bones, or to convey through fable and faith, while you stalk the valley as a mass of tattered skin, as a figure whose feet must solve the maze of shattered ribs, and who, days later, when ashes speckle the ground, begins breaking apart spines and skulls, and with their chunks and shards builds pyramids, shrines, obelisks you dedicate to yourself, so that like a god, your reign one day can be denounced, and you can watch your kingdom fall, burn before you're casted out. And I will go ahead and just read this last poem. This last poem is titled Hostage. You awake to a body not your own, and with it fall in line, follow capped and faceless men up a hill, a bluff, a mountainside, up inclines with more names than you own, and which you give your new limbs to when daylight kneels, pledges itself to night's airless throne. Moonlight reigns, creatures howl, and between the shrieks and grunts, between intermissions of teeth-splitting bone, you picture yourself before this self, young, alone, crossing fields filled with heaps of metal, plastic, clothes, with mounds of trash you dig through, unsure what you're looking for, but certain of how sharp it should feel, and of how, when the time comes, you will place it on your throat, gaze at the sky, and offer, without speaking a word, this body for something greater in return.